Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field.
This show is brought to you by Automotive Seminars. If you're looking to stay up on the cutting edge diagnostic strategies and techniques, this is the place. You've got live 4-hour seminars that are put online that you can join in, ask questions, interact with the instructors with some of the best of the best. They've got Keith Perkins and John Thornton putting on classes like network diagnostics, mechanical engine testing, advanced electrical testing, and GDI diagnostics, and a ton more. And once you purchase one of these training seminars, you can access this at any time that you want through your account at automotiveseminars.com. You can rewatch the training a year, 2 years later, which makes this training even more valuable. So I highly recommend you check this out. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Just me on the show this week, and I am going to be talking about mice this week on the show. Yeah, rodents, it's usually mice. We see this a lot on vehicles where there's rodent damage to the electrical system. It's usually wiring. I'm sure everyone out there, if you've been in this industry for any period of time, you've seen the same thing. But I had a really interesting one this week. Because of the damage that was done, how it was done, it created a very interesting problem. And it got me thinking about some of the other rodent damage vehicles that I've seen over the years where, I mean, number one, it's usually an open circuit, but sometimes can be a shorted circuit. Or in the case of the one I dealt with this week, it was open and shorted, right? So you didn't have power where you expected to have power, and you did have power in another wire you didn't expect to have power on. So obviously those can happen, and it's, not a huge mystery once you find where the damage is. You can see it pretty plainly. But the thing about rodent damage to wiring is that for the most part, it is going to be a unique one-off scenario that you may never see that exact fault on that type of vehicle ever again. Now, that's not 100% true, and I'll give you an example. Because, of course, there are specific areas in the vehicle within components that might attract a rodent, right? They are going to go for the small spaces that are maybe contained, a place where that they feel that they could build a nest, right? And they bring in stuff, and you can see the padding from or insulation or nuts and seeds and things like that. You'll see little nests, but then wherever they pick to make their home, they end up chewing on wiring, and somehow or another it always ends up being the CAN wires, it seems, that they go for. There was an issue with, I think it was either Toyota or Ford, where they had a SOE-based insulation on their wiring, and it was almost attractive to rodents, and so they were chewing up the insulation like crazy on these. But I mean, again, we've been seeing this for years. This is nothing new. Of course, up here in Minnesota, it seems to happen in the wintertime even more so, because of course they're looking for a nice warm place to spend the winter. And hey, under the hood or in the cab of the vehicle, it's a great place to make a little mouse home. So of course, chewing wiring, we're going to have issues, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today, but also just kind of the uniqueness. Now, let me start off actually with one that I thought this was pretty crazy, that the mouse ended up chewing the same wire on a similar truck years apart. So I'll give you the scenario, and actually I don't even have the exact year. I think it was around a 2010-ish Ford F-150.
and it wouldn't start, and you couldn't communicate with a number of control modules. It was the ABS, the PCM, and I think the airbag control module, maybe one other one. So there was 4 or 5 different modules you couldn't communicate with. And, you could look at the live network thing and, okay, all these modules are offline. And I ended up finding, okay, what do they share? They all share a power feed from run start relay that's in the fuse box under the hood. And this is the old style where that fuse box is like right front and center under the hood when you open it up, kind of over the top of the fan shroud. There's a relay in there, body control module operates it, turns it on, it sends power to these other modules. And interestingly enough, this is hindsight. I was actually putting this together for a network class that I presented, but you could actually see on the CAN bus network that these modules lived on, where they should be communicating, but they're not. You could actually see the bias voltage of the network be lower than where you expected. Now, this is kind of a networking thing, but I just thought I'd point it out because you can see it plain as day when these modules are not receiving the power feed that they need, but they're still on the bus, like physically connected. They'll actually drag that bias voltage down below 2.5. It's just something to pay attention to, right? If you see your bias voltage on your CAN bus network is not at 2.5, it's significantly elevated or it's below, you can say, hey, I might have a power feed issue to a module or modules in this case. And then the opposite, if it's higher than expected, I might have a ground issue to a module or modules. And it's not going to solve the problem for you just by observing that. And I'm sure there's circumstances where maybe it doesn't necessarily apply to the fix, but a lot of the times it can at least get you thinking like, oh, okay, I see a bunch of modules I can't talk to. My bias voltage is lower than I'd expect. Do they share a power feed? That would be the next thing. It's not like to make that like determination right on the spot. I definitely have this, but let me take stock of these modules and see, do they share a power feed? And then maybe I'll go after that. Now, full transparency, this was back in I think 2019 that I diagnosed this vehicle. So it was a long time ago, but I had some screenshots of it and stuff. I wasn't aware of looking at bias voltage. I did not make that that clarification at that point. I went through the hard way and then I just ended up checking like, hey, I have all these modules. The CAN bus pattern actually looked halfway decent. Again, paying specific attention, you could see the bias was a little low, but the traffic was still there. I could still communicate with other things. It didn't seem like I had an open, I think, 60 ohms on the bus that they were on. And I eventually got to the point that, okay, all these modules share a power feed. Found that it was that run start relay, which is controlled by the BCM. It was not being controlled by the BCM. There's a single wire the BCM uses to control that relay in that underhood fuse box. Wasn't getting the signal, and found that there was a wire underneath that fuse box that was chewed through by a mouse. Okay, easy enough to fix, right? Just patch up that wire and you're good to go. And it makes sense that the mouse wanted to get into this little contained space underneath this fuse box because it's housed by like a plastic shell. And of course you got all the wires underneath the fuse box to all the fuses and all the relays. And the mouse just decided to chew that one, I think it was a purple wire, and that was the only one it chewed, right? And why? Who knows? That's the one it picked though. Now, fast forward about 4 years. This was 2023, I think it was 23 that I looked at another Ford F-150. And the funny thing was, this was about a mile from the first shop that I made that diagnosis on. It was in the same town, different shop, different truck, but very similar, like the same setup. And it had the exact same modules that were offline. And I remember looking at it because I had made a case study out of the first one. And I remember looking at it, I'm like, oh, hey, I remember all these modules. And this time around, I had been through some classes, got some information. And I did notice that CAN bus voltage. I was like, oh, it's a little low. And the last time I had this, it was, that run start relay not providing power to the modules in question. So I go and I find, and okay, I'm not getting a signal to that relay. And I pull up the bottom of the fuse box, and a mouse had gotten into the bottom of the fuse box and chewed up that one single purple wire again. Now, again, different truck. I'm assuming different mouse, different shop, but exact same wire chewed underneath that fuse box. So I guess I'm putting this out there to say my episode idea was wrong. Sometimes they do pick the same spot. How often that's going to happen, I don't know. But I thought it was pretty funny that the exact same problem happened it wasn't a host of wires. It was just one wire that the mouse decided to choose. Does it have something to do with the color? I have no idea. Anyways, that was interesting. But obviously we've seen mice get into things like underneath fuse boxes and stuff and chew up wires. Now, that's just an open circuit, right? And there's nothing really that special about finding an open circuit, right? It's identifying the circuit that you have a problem with, identifying that, hey, it's open, and then it's finding the open. That, generally makes for a fairly boring podcast to just tell you about finding open wires, okay? But sometimes you can have other things happen as they chew through multiple wires. You can have a short between two wires, right? And like I mentioned, they seem to pick the CAN bus wires for whatever reason. Maybe it's that mice chew other wires and they're less critical circuits, and customers don't bring their vehicles in if some minor thing like a switch for a dome light doesn't work or something like that. They're just like, whatever, but a CAN bus line that's chewed is going to disable the vehicle. So we see those more. That might be why that seems to be the case more often, but somehow or another they always seem to find those CAN bus wires. Maybe it's a twisted pair, I don't know. Anyways, I had a Ford Escape recently where that was the case. Not only did they chew through the CAN lines, but they shorted them together, right? Because they're pulling those little copper strands apart, and then they kind of just leave it in a mess, and then those wires are touching together. And when you have a shorted CAN bus, obviously if you ohm check between the high and the low side, you're going to get 0 ohms, not OL, not 120, not 60. You have 0. It beeps if you have it on the continuity setting, and that is a short together. If you scope a shorted CAN bus, and many of you have seen this, it's pretty much going to be a flat line. Now, not perfectly. If you look closely at the line on your scope, you'll see just a little bit of movement off of that bias voltage, right? You're going to have 2.5. And if you zoom in on it, you're like, oh, that actually looks like what could be a CAN packet. Now, it definitely doesn't look right. There's not much movement off of that bias, but you'll actually see a little bit of something, even if they're shorted together, because the modules are still trying to communicate, but with the high and the low shorted together, they cancel each other out. So it's not usable. You can't talk to anything. That was the case on this Escape. And nothing real special about this. I just basically broke the network down into sections and followed where that short was. It ended up being underneath the battery tray. There's a harness that runs near the ABS module, and the CAN lines are right on the top of that harness, kind of exposed actually. And of course the mouse, that was a great spot for the little mouse underneath the battery tray on this harness. Got hungry, chewed the wires, that sort of stuff happens as well. So that one. Now I'm going to get to the interesting car here. And again, spoiler, it's rodent damage, but I thought the way that the symptoms presented themselves were pretty interesting on this one. Learned a little bit about the car. Will I ever see this exact same problem on this car again? Probably not, because it was a real specific way that the mouse chewed through the wires that allowed this to happen. So this was a 2019 Toyota Corolla, and the issue that they were having was once you start up this vehicle, and sometimes you had to drive it, but it would happen pretty frequently, you'd shut off the vehicle and the HVAC controls in the center of the dash would stay on, and you can control the HVAC system indefinitely or until the battery died. And you could take the key out of the ignition. This was a blade style key on this one. And obviously the car shuts off, but that HVAC system keeps running, drains the battery, but you could operate it like the key was still on. And the shop had been through this, and they replaced a few things trying to get this resolved, but they're really busy and they just didn't have the time to, dig into this fully. So we take a look at it, and at first it wasn't acting up, but they said, well, sometimes when you drive it, it happens and it's pretty consistent. And they actually just hopped in it, took it around the parking lot and then shut it off. And then it was acting up. So it didn't take much to get this to happen. And so then it's in the bay, key is off, and verify HVAC controls are on the little screen. It's an automatic system, and there's just, a few things on the screen. You can control everything. You can run the fan. Or actually, he had the fan unplugged so that it wouldn't completely drain the battery. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. But anyways, we get into it, and they had already replaced the AC amplifier, because he did note that when the AC amplifier, which is the control module that's really in charge of the HVAC system, you have the display screen, but that is just for controls, and it links on a LIN bus to the AC amplifier, which is really in charge of, making decisions, making things happen within the HVAC system, including controlling the compressor. And they had replaced the AC amplifier with a used one, because when he unplugged the AC amplifier, he said, then you can no longer control the HVAC. The screen went off, and the drain for the battery went away. Now, that is somewhat normal, right? If you had the car on and you unplugged the AC amplifier, the screen would go off and it would stop working. But it seemed to be that there was something to do with that module, but replacing it didn't do anything. It had the exact same situation even after replacement. But it was a good direction for me to start with. It's like, maybe I should be looking at this, what changes. Does unplugging the module really get rid of the problem, or is it just disabling enough stuff because that module, operates a number of things within the HVAC that it seems like the problem's gone? That's what I have to determine on this one. Scan it, no useful codes in it. When the key is on, everything seems to work the way it should, but of course you have a bunch of stuff working that you wouldn't expect it to while the key is off. So I go to the AC amplifier, which is in the center console area near the accelerator pedal, and I start looking at the circuits that are connected to it, and it's pretty straightforward as far as how this thing actually gets powered up and operates. It's got a constant battery feed, obviously a ground, and then it has a switched ignition feed. And that's it. And so that switched ignition feed needs to have power in order for this module to turn on. If that switched ignition feed is off, that module should not be on. And okay, so it's a blue wire. I checked the blue wire. It has power when the key is off. That's why this is on. Okay, well, that should be pretty straightforward. Now, where does that come from, and why does that have power on there? That's the next thing that I have to figure out. So go to the diagram. It's right there. Shows it as the heater ignition fuse in the fuse box that's right there underneath the dash. It's a 10 amp. And of course that has power as well, along with this blue wire. So the question now is power being fed to this fuse and then to the module and the other things that this fuse actually powers? There is 4 different legs off of this heater ignition fuse. It goes to the control assembly on the dash. It goes to the AC amplifier. goes to the compressor relay and a couple other relays under the hood as well. So this powers up a few different things. It's not just the AC amplifier. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. It's like, okay, I have power on this fuse when the key is off. Now, this fuse gets fed from an ignition relay, which is located within the fuse box that's under the dash, right? So it's like a junction block. And it does have like a BCM that's plugged into it, but the box itself isn't a module, but it has internal relays. And one of those internal relays is an ignition relay that is controlled by the ignition switch and then sends power to this fuse when the ignition is turned on. So that's my question. Okay, is power getting fed to this fuse and then going to these components, or is something on that circuit, one of those four legs, shorted to power and the power is back feeding to everything else, keeping it on? It's one of those two options. So that is fairly easy to figure out in a situation where you have a fuse and it has power on it when you would expect there to not be power on it. Pull that fuse in the state where you would expect power to not be on it, key off, and then check both sides of the fuse, right? So what I mean by that is you have two terminals once you remove that fuse, and you can use your test light and figure out, okay, do I have power on one or both sides? You probably are only going to have it on one side. And then you could turn the key on, because you might say, well, I don't know which side this goes to, but you could figure it out with the test light, right? I could go over to my AC amplifier, and that leg that comes out of the fuse is going to go to pin 1. It's a blue wire. If I remove the fuse, do I still have power on that blue wire? Okay, if I do, I know for sure it's not coming from the ignition switch. And then I can go up to the fuse, I can test both sides. One should have power, one won't. That's probably the ignition feed side. I could turn the key on, and then I should have power on both sides of the fuse, right? So you can use a little bit of logic there to figure out, okay, that side of the fuse goes to the components. That side of the fuse comes from my ignition relay, which again is internal to this fuse box. So I figured that out, and it is on the component side. Okay, so key off, got power on the fuse, remove it, and everything stays on at that point. Even if I pull that fuse, that does not disable the HVAC system. So, I mean, right there, you know, even without using a test light, that like, okay, power is being shorted to this circuit somewhere, somehow. But I got power on the component side of that fuse. I have power at my AC amplifier, and I'm using that kind of as a test just because it's easy to access, and I'm just back probed into that wire right at the AC amplifier. Now, like he said, if you unplug the AC amplifier, it seems like everything turns off, and I verified that. I unplugged the AC amplifier, and I no longer have power on that blue wire. Okay, so fuse could be out, fuse could be in, doesn't matter at this point. I put everything back in, but I have power on that blue wire as long as the module's plugged in. I unplug the module, everything shuts off, and I do not have power on that blue wire anymore. So I don't really need to look at the other components, and I didn't. I'm focused in on that AC amplifier. Now, that again, they already replaced it with a used one. First one did the same thing. Is it possible this is a common issue with these? I'm not sure. Is there something else that could be shorted that's feeding power through the module onto this circuit? That's a question that you have to ask yourself. I mean, it's a lot of cases when you unplug the control module and it fixes your issue. Sometimes it's a control module, right? Maybe something taken down a CAN bus, or in this case where we have power shorted to a circuit. You unplug the module, it's no longer shorted the circuit. Maybe it's the fault of a module, but maybe there's a short somewhere that's feeding through the module onto this circuit. And it's something you have to consider. And how do we figure out if that's the case? Now, what I did here was I looked at the circuitry on the diagram. And of course, I should only have two power feeds into this module, one constant, one switched. But that's it. I should not have any other 12 volts going to this module at any point. But when I have the thing unplugged, if I go across all of the pins and just touch them with a grounded test light, only one of them should light up unless I have the key on, then two of them should light up. And like I mentioned, when the module's unplugged, I no longer have power on that blue wire. So the power, the B plus is actually coming from the module onto that circuit, but from where? Okay, now I do have it on my white wire, which is my constant. I would expect that. Okay, that's normal. That's not a problem. But do I have it on another circuit? And I do. And actually, it's real close. It is one pin over from the blue wire. So the blue ignition feed, where I have power, I don't want it, that's pin 1. And pin 2 is a light green wire. Where does that go? That goes right to the solenoid on the compressor. Okay, so this is the power feed, and it says solenoid plus, but this is the power feed to the compressor solenoid that the AC amplifier is going to use to operate this thing. Now, there should not be power on this wire unless the AC amplifier is sending it there. But for some reason there is. And this is module unplugged, right? So pin 2, light green, goes straight to the AC compressor. I've got power there. And then you plug it in. I still have power there. And then I also have it on the blue wire. So my guess is here that this power that is on this wire should not be there based on the diagram. A solenoid on a compressor shouldn't provide that. But it is, and it's backfeeding through the module onto the ignition circuit, which is keeping the HVAC system awake. Okay, so now I figure out, okay, why do I have power on there? And I go immediately to the compressor once I see this. And turns out it's already unplugged. And I asked him, he's like, did you unplug the compressor? He said, yeah, it was one of the things I was looking at to see if it had anything to do with it. And I just left it unplugged. Okay, so compressor's unplugged and I got power there. So it's definitely not the compressor itself. And I go to the light green wire on the compressor with my test light and I don't have power there. So I double checked the diagram. I actually pulled up the OE diagram. I had a Toyota sub, so I used Toyota service information to make sure that like the diagram wasn't wrong. And it's the same color wire, but I look, okay, this is this is the wire. Pin 2 does go to the compressor on this circuit, but I have power at the module, but I don't have power at the compressor. Well, there's two other connectors in this circuit between the AC amplifier and the compressor. So I got to find these connectors, and then I can break up the circuit and figure out, well, number one, why do I power one spot, not the other? And then is there an open and a short? That's what it would seem to be, unless I'm still misunderstanding the diagram. But let's go to these connectors, break it down, see what we can find. So there's AE6, which is located under the dash on the passenger side, just before the harness leaves the cabin to go under the hood. And there is BA2, which is actually located in the underhood fuse block. And these are both pretty easy to access. The one under the dash, you just have to reach underneath there. Finding them was a little bit of work, but once I found them, they're easy enough to access. So AE6 under the dash, I unplug it, and I have power on the side that goes under the hood, right? So this is a connector between the AC amplifier and the compressor under the dash. I unplug it. And if you look at the diagram, you can see the male-female side on the diagram, so you know which direction you're going, right? If I touch it with a test light, it lights up on the female side. I look at the diagram, female side goes towards the fuse box and the compressor, and I have power there. Okay, so I need to go under the hood. So I look under the hood. There was evidence of rodents being under there. They had chewed away some of the padding on the firewall. They had a little nest underneath the intake. So right there, and I think the tech had even mentioned he noticed that there was some evidence of rodents under the hood. But I follow the harness. It leaves the firewall, goes across the firewall, goes under the air box, and then over to the fuse box. And I look it over, and I don't see any evidence of the rodents actually damaging the harness there. Now, it could be underneath something. Maybe I don't see it, but it's not visible in the part of the harness that I can see. So then I go over to BA2 connector, which is in the underhood fuse box. I disconnect that. I don't have power on either side. Okay. So somewhere between that connector under the dash and the fuse box, I not only have an open, but then I have a short to power on the side that goes towards the cab of the vehicle. And this is where we were talking about it. And I was like, hey, I think we should pull this fuse box up and look underneath it, because it's very strange that I have a short to power and an open here. So he yanked up the fuse box, which took a little bit of work to pull some things apart to get underneath there. And as soon as he did, he found at the bottom that light green wire had been chewed, along with another wire, which had constant power on it, and it was touching that one. So basically it opened it up in the direction of the compressor, but it shorted it to power in the direction of the AC amplifier. And that wire having constant power, the power wire for the compressor solenoid, backfed through the AC amplifier onto the ignition circuit, which kept that module and the screen and everything with the HVAC activated, even when the key was in the off position. So again, rodent damage, will I ever see that problem again? Probably not. I mean, I guess it's good to know that that sort of thing can happen. And that's what I'm taking away from it is when you have something like this, right? Power shorted on a wire, you unplug a module, it gets rid of it. It's not always the module, right? It can be another circuit connected to that module that is not normally supposed to have power, but it does. And that's going to backfeed through other circuits. So just be aware of that. If you get to a part of like, hey, this module is bad, I think it's the cause. Double check, use some logic, look at the wiring diagram. Like, okay, which wire should I have power on? Do I have power on those? Do I have power on any other ones? If I do, and I don't expect power to be there, why is there power there? And could that be causing my problem? Same thing could be true of a ground, right? You could have 5-volt reference shorted out. That's taking down a control module, preventing it from talking. And we've talked about it before where, you have a whole network taken down because of a module that has a bad ground, right? We remove that module from the network and now I can talk to everybody else, but you plug that module in and you can't talk to anything. Or is it the module? Okay. Is it potentially a bad ground to that module that's causing that to happen? It does happen, right? So I guess it's just a good reminder. But those mice, those rodents, they definitely keep you on your toes because you're going to see these unique one-off problems that you can't really use pattern failures to find. You just have to use your basic electrical diagnostic skills in order to get to the solution. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Wanted to share it. That's all I got for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Always appreciate it. But with that out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.